Whether you love them or hate them, one thing's for certain, you simply cannot ignore them. We're talking, of course, about the Texas Longhorns, who will enter 2010 ranked in the top 5 in both major polls. 5th according to the Associated Press, 4th according to the coaches poll. Last season, of course, the Longhorns rolled through the regular season, needed a last-second field goal from Hunter Lawrence to win the Big 12 championship over Nebraska, and found themselves just one game away from the national championship. And of course, most of us know what happened in that title game against Alabama. An early Colt McCoy injury simply changed the complexion of the game. There's no doubt about it. Enter Garrett Gilbert, a true freshman. 1 minute, you're standing on the sideline watching the game, and it's like that old saying, if you're a backup, you're one play away from becoming a starter. That was true in the case of Garrett Gilbert. In the beginning, he did look like a true freshman, making mistakes one after another. But late in the third quarter and most of the fourth, he looked like a veteran. In fact, his passing was very precise. And Texas, at one point down 24-6 in that game, actually got the Alabama lead down to 4 points at 24-20. And Texas had the ball with about 3 minutes to go. And then Gilbert got hit from the blind side. Ball popped loose. Alabama recovered, would eventually score a touchdown. Game, set, match to the tie. So even though the beginning and ending of the game for Garrett Gilbert was not what he pictured, you have to remember something. He was thrown right into the fire. A true freshman playing in front of over 100,000 at the Rose Bowl Stadium, in front of millions of people on television, and of course against the #1 D in the country in the Crimson Tide. The game must have seemed like it was going on 78 RPM in the beginning for Gilbert in that game, but what we saw in the second half, by and large, was a quarterback that has an arm, that has precision, and we saw a quarterback in most of that second half that has confidence. Longhorn fans hope that that translates into a successful 2010 season. But for the Longhorns to repeat as Big 12 champions, they know that they're going to have to get a lot of production from their backups. You have to remember, the Longhorns returned just 5 players on offense this year. The defense, they returned 7, and we'll talk a little bit more about the defense in a second. But of course, Garrett Gilbert now becomes the man at quarterback, replacing the winningest QB of all time in the form of Colt McCoy, a 4-year starter who essentially had to take over for a legend at UT, of course, in Vince Young. Of course, I'm not saying that Garrett Gilbert is going to become a legend, and it's really not fair for me to compare him against any Texas quarterback, much less Colt McCoy, because of what McCoy did for that program with his ability, but also with his leadership and toughness. Will Garrett Gilbert be a quarterback that his teammates can feed off of and rely on? I know this is going to sound like a cop-out, but only time is going to tell that. It's that plain and simple. What you're going to see this year from Texas is a different type of offense. You're not going to see so much of the spread option anymore. It's going to be more of a pro-style offense, I formation, where Greg Davis, offensive coordinator, wants the running back, not necessarily the quarterback, to become the main focus as far as running the football. You have to remember that as much as McCoy provided for the Longhorns by running, he did suffer at least 2 significant injuries in his career, in 2006 and of course in the national championship game just a few months ago. After a while, you leave yourself open for big hits, and it's only a matter of time before something bad could happen. So it's a violent game, but I think what Greg Davis wants to do, he wants the running back, and he wants the running back big time to get the job done when it comes to the ground game. Now, as far as the ground game goes for the Longhorns, this is going to be FYI #1. Who's going to be the man, okay? Will it be Trey Newton? And I have several Texas subscribers, okay, on this page. Since they probably have more inside access to the Longhorn program than I do, I want their opinion on who they think the running back should be, and I also want their input on what they've heard of who the main guy is going to be. I mean, I've looked down Texas's depth chart, and I think Trey Newton's got to be the guy. Granted, he only had about 500 yards rushing last year, but of course now I think he'll get more touches. Will it be Fozzie Whitaker? Now, Whitaker is a running back that has potential, but has had knee injuries that he suffered starting 2 years ago, and last year he only averaged about 4 touches a ball game, so I'm not sure if Whitaker is going to be the man as well. And I've also heard that Cody Johnson is an up-and-coming player, but we'll see if they rely on him. But I think really it's going to be, if I had to make an educated guess, I would think Trey Newton would be the guy, but I would really love some input from my Longhorn subscribers or anybody who would know the main guy in the Texas backfield coming up. As far as the receiving core, they lose a good one. We're talking about Jordan Shipley, who did so much damage in the open field. Dangerous after the catch, and of course, dangerous on kick returns, as we found out throughout his career. So now you're going to have 3 receivers who are darn good for the Longhorns. And I think the main guy is going to be Malcolm Williams, who they say has NFL-type talent. Has to do a better job of holding on to the ball, though. We saw him with key drop passes in last year's national championship game. James Kirkendall, they think, also will contribute as well, along with John Childs, the one-time quarterback for the Longhorns, converted into a wideout position. That seems to be more of a natural fit for him because of his athletic ability. So they won't have a Jordan Shipley-type player, at least not that we know so far. So those 3 guys are really going to have to step up and make life easier for Garrett Gilbert. The Longhorn offensive line, this is going to be my second focus. In particular, the left side, the blind side of Garrett Gilbert, who is going to be primarily a pocket passer. That seems to fit him. That means that the left side of the offensive line has the pressure on them. Unfortunately for the Longhorns, their entire left side has graduated, and the center is gone as well. So Kyle Hicks now will be moved from right tackle to left tackle, and this guy has all Big 12 written all over him. Question is, how quickly will he adapt to his new position of left tackle, the pressure cooker position on the interior line? And also Mike Huey, the right guard last year for the Horns, the other returning starter up front, he will be moved to left guard. So really watch out for that left side. And of course, you get 3 players to replace now as far as the rest of the interior, the center, and the 2 positions on the right side. So this is going to be a pivotal area for the Longhorns, especially because Gilbert is a different type of quarterback than McCoy. Now, as far as the defense goes, look, last year it was outstanding. It took on the mentality of their coordinator and Will Muschamp, who looks like he could go out on the field and knock some heads. 3rd in overall D a year ago. The defense did lose 4 dandies, though. All 4 players picked in the NFL draft. 3 of them picked in the first 2 rounds. Now, that's what I call production. Sam Acho returns, though, as a defensive end. This guy should have all Big 12 written all over his name. Was a terrific run stopper and also got into the backfield with 11 sacks a year ago. They're going to be expecting big things from him. But they did lose Sergio Kendall and they did lose Lamar Houston. So getting to the quarterback will be very critical. Will anybody besides Acho be able to step up for the Longhorns in that role? The linebacking situation looks outstanding for the Longhorns because they return Keenan Robinson, and Robinson could be an All-American by season's end. If you watch Texas this year and watch Robinson, watch the way he moves laterally from left to right. Covers a lot of field. Texas's secondary might be the best in the country, and imagine what would happen if they had Earl Thomas back. Earl left Texas early. He was a first-round pick in the NFL draft, so you can hardly blame him. But the rest of the secondary is intact, including 2 fantastic corners, Aaron Williams and Curtis Brown. They are back. Chyke Brown is another guy that Texas will rely on. He can play the corner or he can play the safety. And you have another good one in Blake Gideon, who started ever since his freshman year. He had 6 INTs a year ago. Special teams-wise, Hunter Lawrence, who had those big kicks last year for the Longhorns, had 3 field goals against Oklahoma, and of course had the 46-yarder game winner against Nebraska in the Big 12 Championship on the final play of the game. Justin Tucker will be expected to pick up from where Hunter Lawrence left off. And speaking of special teams, we know that Jordan Shipley's not there anymore, but they hope that DJ Monroe can become the next great kick returner for the Longhorns. He has a lot of quickness and speed, very explosive. They expect big things from him. Looking at the 2010 Longhorn schedule, just like last season, Texas should not have any difficulty outside of conference play. For example, September 4th, they travel to Houston at Reliance Stadium to play Rice. Should be a Longhorn win with ease. September 11th, it's a showdown against Wyoming. Last year, the Cowboys actually played Texas tough for a half, only to see Texas pull away in the second half. The team's rematch in Austin, this one should not even be close from the beginning. And for the second straight year, Texas steps into Big 12 play early against Texas Tech. Last year, the Red Raiders actually played Texas pretty competitive, losing to the Horns by just 10 points, and that game was in Austin. This game will be in Lubbock, and as many questions as I have about Texas Tech, I have questions about Texas as well because McCoy is not there anymore, and it's a new style offense. Texas will be favored, but I don't think it's a lock that they win this game, so I put this in the either-or category because it is a road game as well. September 25th, they go outside of conference play, the Horns do, to play tradition-rich UCLA, but these are not your father's Bruins who went to major bowl games in the 80s and in the 90s. UCLA is still not at the top of the Pac-10 yet, and Texas should take advantage winning that game in Austin. And then all eyes will be on the next two ball games. The difference between Texas having a good season and a great season will hinge upon October 2nd and October 16th. Of course, October 2nd, the Red River Shootout against Oklahoma, again at the Cotton Bowl, about as even as you can get. I would not be surprised if Vegas has this game as a pick'em. Fortunately for the Longhorns, they get 2 weeks to prepare for their next game. And fortunately, it's on the road in Lincoln against Nebraska in a rematch of last year's Big 12 championship game. And don't be surprised if weather becomes a factor. Typically, it gets cold from mid-October on to December in that part of the country. October 23rd, Iowa State will come to Darrell K. Royal Stadium. Iowa State, not a chance at all of beating Texas. Victory for the Longhorns. And the following week is about as automatic of a win as you can get, hosting Baylor. And then November 6th at Kansas State. And of course, Longhorn fans absolutely can't stand the Wildcats in particular because of the losses to K-State in 06 and 07. But those teams for K-State were multi-dimensional with Josh Freeman at QB. This K-State offense isn't. Texas to win in Manhattan. October 13th, you're taking on a rebuilt Oklahoma State team. And even if Oklahoma State were full strength, I'd still take Texas because Oklahoma State hasn't beaten Texas in 13 seasons. And then November 20th, taking on Florida Atlantic in another non-conference game. That one is in Austin. Texas can name their score in this game. And then 5 days later, it's their rivals from College Station, Texas A&M. Last year, it was a track meet between these two teams, very high scoring with Texas edging out A&M. The game is in Austin. I put this as either or just because last year's game was so competitive. A&M should be better this year on offense in particular. The question is, has A&M's defense improved? It's a rivalry game, and sometimes in rivalry games, you throw the records out. Texas will be favored, but I put this still as an either or game in Austin. Keep in mind as well that Texas plays just 2 games outside of the state of Texas this season. If they got to the Big 12 championship, they'd play that one in Dallas and have a big-time home fan advantage. Looking at the best worst-case scenarios for Texas, first of all, worst-case scenario is that they would go 8-4, meaning that Gilbert did not develop a whole lot as quarterback, and that would also mean that the ground game struggled, and it would also mean that Texas missed those players that they had from last season that are now in the NFL. Best case scenario for the Longhorns, yes, they could win every game on the schedule. They'll be favored in most. And even though the Nebraska game is in Lincoln, you have to remember Texas has had a pretty good track history against the Huskers. They've only lost once to Nebraska since the formation of the Big 12 Conference. And remember, if they go 12-0, obviously that would mean they would go to the Big 12 championship game, which would mean they would be favored in that contest as well. Most likely scenario for the Texas Longhorns is that they go 10-2 and make it 10 straight seasons with at least 10 wins for Mack Brown's squad. That would be the second longest streak in NCAA history. Florida State has the longest. They did it 14 years in a row. Texas will once again have a terrific team, and in some spots, they just reload. But I still have questions about Texas's ground game. That may be their biggest question. Also, will Garrett Gilbert develop a lot this season or just a little bit? We'll have to wait and see. And defensively, they did have some key contributors move on to the NFL, although I do think the world of the secondary. But I don't know how good Texas's pass rush is going to be. There are some questions about Texas, which is why I cannot put them going back to the national championship game, but it'll still be a solid season for the Horns at 10-2 and an outside shot at a BCS game.